Hey guys, I know it's been a little while since I last made a video, but I'm back now, and I have a guide on the Hookbill. The Hookbill is the Caldari faction frigate, and for a faction frigate I think it's a little bit unusual compared to the other races. Because all the Hookbill is really is, it's basically just a Kestrel that has one extra mid-slut. That's really all that it is. It has the exact same range bonus that the Kestrel does. And actually, the two ships have the exact same on-paper DPS. I mean, I'm just comparing this Kestrel, conventional Kestrel fit here with the Hookbill fit I'm going to start with. Except the Hookbill is actually, it's locked into mostly doing kinetic damage, whereas the Kestrel is not. So in that sense, the Kestrel can actually be a little bit better in terms of DPS. And the other difference is the Hookbill does have more buffer and quite a bit more EHP. And it does have a little bit more speed, but not much. And its speed is also somewhat canceled out, I guess, a little bit by the fact that it has a larger sig than the Kestrel does. So what this means is that if you're flying the Hookbill and you're not taking full advantage of this extra mid slot, then all that you're flying is just an expensive Kestrel. And in some cases it could actually be worse than the Kestrel, simply because of the lack of damage type selection. But the good news is that if you fit the ship correctly and you use this fifth slot well, then this extra mid slot is very, very powerful. And I think this, just combined with the nature of low sec Plex mechanics, can make the Hookbill probably one of the most powerful dueling frigates in the game. But how to optimally fit the ship actually kind of depends on exactly what it is you're fighting and how your opponent is fit. And so there are a lot of different Hookbill fits which can be good. So I'm going to do a little bit of EFT warrioring here. And I'm going to start off with this Hookbill fit. This is a double web micro warp drive rocket brawling fit. And so what I'm doing with this extra mid slot is I'm just using a second web. And what I want to do is to show how you can use DPS charts and projected effects in EFT to help you analyze the value of fits in your DPS application, especially with missiles. So I have an example set up here. I have my Hookbill kind of in a hypothetical fight here against the Comet. Let me start off by turning off all the webs on both ships and also the afterburners and, well, prop mods on both ships. This Comet here is kind of a standard afterburner scram web blaster Comet, which is hull tanked. So this is kind of the new standard, I guess, low sec blaster Comet fit. Ever since the hull tanking rigs got introduced, this is kind of the best way to fit it, I think. And this is a Comet fit which is very, very common. I mean, a lot of people Plex farm just by sitting in a Plex at 0 in this Comet, and they just annihilate anyone who comes in just with their raw blaster DPS. So right now in my Hookbill I have Scourge faction rockets loaded, firing here at this Comet. That's my target. And the DPS chart here shows my actual applied DPS to this Comet. So right now I'm actually applying my full 159 DPS, which is the same as my on-paper DPS to this Comet. And that's because he doesn't have his afterburner on. So let me turn the afterburner on the Comet on and overheat. And now my applied DPS is dropping to 85, which is about half of what my on-paper DPS is. I could fix this, of course, if I just turn on one of my webs. EFT's chart actually does account for this. So now here within web range against this Comet, I'm again basically applying close to my full on-paper DPS here with faction rockets. And this is why I think if you're using rockets, you really need to fit a web, always. I really see a lot of things like dual MASB breachers or sometimes dual vengeances, which can't fit webs. And I really think they're just not very good, just because they really can't apply DPS well at all. You can see without the web that my DPS is basically dropping by 50%, which is huge. So really, if you take nothing else from this video, just make sure if you're flying a missile ship, a rocket ship specifically, fit a web, always. Okay, so this is all well and good. I'm damaging the Comet pretty well in this situation. But let me show what happens if I were to switch to T2 Rage rockets. These are T2 missiles, which do about 20% extra DPS. You can see my on-paper DPS here has gone up to 192. But both the explosion radius and the explosion velocity of these compared to faction rockets are much worse. And so because of that, even with my web on, I'm back to 100 DPS against this Comet, which is significantly worse than the faction rockets. And this is why people usually recommend that against other frigates, you should always just use faction missiles, whether it's rockets, light missiles, or whatever. And this is why, because usually the damage application is not very good. Let me just show you what happens if I were to turn off the afterburner on the Comet. In this case, I'm back up to my full on-paper DPS. So if this were, say, a micro warp drive Comet and not an afterburner Comet, then using my Rage rockets would actually be a very good idea. That's actually what you should do. But against afterburners actually help mitigate missile DPS quite a lot. So it's not a good idea to use them in that case. So let me turn this Comet's afterburner back on. Here I'm back to 100 DPS. But now watch what happens when I turn my second web on. Now with my second web, even with this Comet's afterburner overheated, now I'm applying my full on-paper DPS. And even with Rage rockets here. And this is really just one of the strengths of having this second web on this hook bill. Because against afterburner frigates here, I'm able to increase my applied DPS by about 20%, simply by virtue of the fact that I'm able to use Rage rockets instead of faction rockets. And 191 DPS is actually quite a lot. If you consider the fact that this is 100% application, I mean, you don't care about tracking, you don't care about optimal range really, or fall off. As long as you're anywhere basically within overheated web range, then you're applying your full damage. And I think that's just really, really good. So I really do like this fit with the double webs. And I also really like fitting micro warp drives on brawling frigates, even in faction warfare at low sec, even though a lot of people think they're terrible. I think the micro warp drive just really opens up the possibilities of what you can engage. Especially it allows you to just destroy micro warp drive kiting ships, and it also allows you to engage gangs and try to split them up on grid, which normally you can't do. But the disadvantage of a micro warp drive brawling frigate usually is that against an afterburner brawling ship like this Comet, that you just have no chance of winning because you have, once he lands a scram and web on you, you just have no range control whatsoever, and he can easily get into optimal range of you and just annihilate you with just blaster DPS. But let's consider the fact that on my hook bill I have 2 webs versus his 1, and let's see how that affects his ability to get close range on me. So I can do this with projected effects. So what I'll do is I will apply both of my webs to this Comet, and I will apply one web to my hook bill, and also make sure my micro warp drive is off. So now you can see the speed in EFT now reflects the effects of these webs. So his speed is 321 meters per second with heat on his afterburner, and mine is 180. So this is a speed difference of 140 meters per second. So what this means is that if I were to start this fight at a range of, say, 7.5 kilometers, it would take this comet 30 seconds in order to burn into the optimal range of his null ammo. And that's assuming that he's heating his afterburner. If he's not heating his afterburner, then it takes twice as long. And usually within 30 seconds, the fight's basically over. So I think that's really the strength of this second web. Even though I think in this particular hypothetical matchup, I think it would still be very, very close. But I think it shows that with good piloting, it's definitely possible for this double web hookbill to beat a blaster comet. So but there are two problems with this hookbill fit, I think. Two major problems. The first is that if you're fighting something that doesn't have an afterburner, then this second web is really not very useful. And because you only need one web in that case, if he's micro warp drive fit, in order to apply your full damage with rage rockets. I mean, the second web does help with range control then, a little bit, I guess. But it doesn't help with DPS application at all. And again, as I've said before, if you're not using this fifth mid slot to its full effect, that you really may as well just be flying a Kestrel. I know I say that again and again, but I think it's really important to just keep it in mind. The second problem with this ship is that I guess it's part of the way that I fit it here because I've used two damage rigs. But it has a massive EM resist hull and a pretty big thermal resist hull as well. And so against something that does a lot of EM-based damage, like say, I think even against a Tormentor, you stand a very good chance of losing. But there are other hookbill fits which are, I guess, better against situations like that. And if you know exactly what it is you're going to fight in advance, you can actually carry a mobile depot with you and refit on the fly to counter them. I have a lot of different fits that I've used that use the same rigs, and I'll just go through them now. I'll use some of these in the fights I'll show later. So this is sort of a baseline double web micro warp drive fit. You can also armor tank a hookbill, and instead of a shield extender, you use a tracking disruptor. This particular fit uses a micro warp drive, but you can also fit an afterburner just fine. And with double webs and the scram, you have very good range control. And also with the tracking disruptor, you can kind of hard counter a lot of turret-based ships. So this type of fit is very, very strong. It's almost like a slasher that I did in the last video, except it actually does a lot more damage. So I guess it's good in that sense. Another fit that I think is good is you can actually do dual prop, fit a micro warp drive and an afterburner. I've been roaming, solo roaming nullsec a lot lately, and this is the fit I've been using most of the time. Because in nullsec, most people fit micro warp drives. So I think having a dual web fit in nullsec is kind of limited value. I think just dual prop is a bit better. And again, all these fits that I've been using use the same rigs. So what I typically do is I just roam with a mobile depot, and if I need to refit in order to, I guess, counter a specific ship, then you can just refit on the fly. And I think that's also one of the real strengths of the hookbill. Start off here with a fight against a light missile crow. And even though the hookbill is actually kind of slow as far as micro warp drive frigates go, it's still fast enough to catch most kiting ships if you slingshot properly. And this is a crow with double nanos and polycarbon rigs, so it's actually one of the worst things for me to try to catch. But you can still do it. To do that, to slingshot him, you double click and space away from him, which is what I'm doing there. And then when your angular velocity drops, you hit approach on him. And you want to make sure your webs are preheated. And as soon as he gets into overheated web range, you want to tackle him. So that's what I do here. And once I do that, he goes down very quickly. And it did take me 2 tries, if you notice, for me to catch him. But really, I mean, if you just fail, you should just try again. So finding a comet here in a plex. And against blasters, you just want to get to the edge of scram range, because you're still going to be applying your full DPS. Whereas even with null ammo, he's not really going to be able to hit you. And when you're going into a plex like that, it's important to remember that you always have a few moments at the start of the fight before he locks you where you can pulse your micro warp drive and try to pull range. Which is what I was able to do in order to get away from out of blaster range from this comet. Using hotkeys to do that, especially the pulse your micro warp drive, can help a lot. So I think it's really important. It's something I really need to work on myself, actually, is using hotkeys a lot more, but it can really help you a lot. I really like having a micro warp drive on my frigates when I'm soloing, because it allows you to try to make something happen against gangs, when otherwise with just a regular afterburner ship you really can't. So here, this comet in this gang was afterburner fit, and the Tristan just wasn't willing to leave the plex to try to chase me. But sometimes just by making your presence known and just by, you know, just being annoying, even if these guys won't fight you, they might call on somebody who will, which is what happens here. After a couple of minutes, a Tyrannus warped in and started burning towards me, so it's clear that he was willing to fight. So what I did is I just burned away from the gang a little bit, just to try to get some distance away from the rest of the ships. And then once I was comfortable with the distance from the rest of them, I just went for it. A Tyrannus is a great ship to fight, because you're able to control range with dual webs. And if you're able to stay just out of his blaster range, as close to the edge of scram range as possible, then you'll easily win a DPS race. And again, the hookbill really does great damage. You can see just how fast he goes down. And he actually is a legit dual prop Tyrannus fit. He's not a fail fit or anything. So I was sitting in a plex here, waiting for someone to come and fight me, and I saw 2 slicers and a Merlin show up on D-scan. So I burned away from the beacon just to try to get them to chase me and hopefully split themselves up. What ends up happening is that the first slicer to come in just starts burning for me right away. And also the Merlin turns out to be afterburner fit, so he's just not going to be a factor in this fight at all. And the second slicer enters the plex late, and he's also very late in turning on his micro warp drive for some reason. So basically what's happened here is that the first slicer is isolated, and now this is the fight that I can take. So now that the first slicer is a good distance away from the rest of his gang, I just started to approach him. And a slicer really is no joke. He is going to be hitting right into my EM resist hull. And so my approach here is, once I tackled him, is to just try to just orbit as close as possible, because the slicer doesn't have a tracking bonus. And also, this is a case where the second web I have on my ship isn't really helping me at all. So my hook bill is basically now just a Kestrel. And he does get through my shields. This is somewhat close, as is to be expected against a laser ship. but he does go down. Right as the second slicer is able to catch up to me. But what I did here is I just overheated my micro warp drive and aligned to a celestial and just warped out. This is another case versus a Tristan and a Comet where just burning away from a Plex and making them chase you can lead to them splitting themselves up. And again, this is why I really like having a micro warp drive, because it allows you to try to make a play in situations like this. So now that the Tristan is isolated, this is just a really easy fight. He goes down fast. And actually, I don't even take that much damage in the process. So it leaves me in a very good position now to fight the Comet 1 versus 1. And this Comet is a micro warp drive rail Comet. So I'll skip ahead a bit here. What I tried to do is to get in close and just orbit him. And I guess if I were any good at this game, I probably could have killed him too, but it didn't really work out too well for me, because he's getting through my shields here and he's still at half armor, and Comets have a lot of structure HP, so I decided not to risk it and just run away. But the point I wanted to make is that often when people think they have the advantage, like in a one versus gang situation, the gang tends to just focus all their attention on getting a point on you, and they don't really pay attention to the relative position of their gang, and that can allow you to get easy kills like what I did against the Tristan there. A better fit to use against rail Comets like that is to go with an armor tank and use a tracking disruptor, because once you get in close you can basically avoid all the damage from his railguns that way. I made a couple of huge mistakes in this fight though that I want to point out. The first mistake I made is that when I first tackled him, I failed to land my scram, and it took me a while to notice this. And the effect of that is that it allows him to pull range away from me a bit. So I finally noticed it and landed my scram there. And the second mistake I made, the bigger mistake, is when I decided to pulse my micro warp drive once to try to help me get in close to him. And what that does is it blows up my sig radius a lot, and that allows him to track me with his railguns, and that causes me to take a lot of damage. So I probably should have lost the fight because of that, but it just turns out to be very close. So an Afterburner armor tanked hook bill with a TD is a strong hard counter against a lot of turret-based ships. So against this Tormentor, I can just avoid all his incoming damage by scram kiting. So this is really just an unfair matchup in my favor. And it's probably not the ideal example of this fit because it's against just a regular T1 frigate. But with this type of fit, you can often easily win against any turret-based ship, even assault frigates or destroyers. So I'm using the same fit against a Retribution here, and I started the fight with a range script loaded in my TD, and this forces him to have to get within my heated web range if he wants to do any damage to me, because the maximum range of a Retribution is about 25 kilometers. And fortunately I am able to tackle him without too much of a problem. And a Retribution has a range bonus, so I'm not able to scram kite. I have to get in close and use a tracking speed script and just orbit as close as possible. So once I tackle him here, I switched out my script to my TD. But a Retribution also has a tracking bonus, and the hookbill has a somewhat high sig radius, so he's still able to hit me and do somewhat decent damage. He actually did do the right thing, and he did switch to multi-frequency crystals. And I probably should be more aggressive here with heating my TD and my afterburner. And the fight does turn out to be very close, but a Retribution is a pretty good ship, I think. And even though I'm flying a hard counter, I think it's a good win. So I was roaming through Null, and I found a Saber gate camping, so I decided to fight him. I'm using a dual prop fit here, which I think is a great fit for this situation, because it means I'll have range control. Plus kinetic is a very good damage type to use against a Saber, so I think this ship is very good for fighting them. So against a Saber, you just want to fight at the edge of scram range to get into his fall off. And I did screw up here by not heating my web, and since he's heating his, that caused me to drop tackle. But fortunately for me, I guess he just tried to burn back to the gate, and he didn't really play this very well either. In the meantime, a Astero jumped in to the system, and he put his drones on me. And I wish I could take credit for a legit 1 versus 2 here, but I'm pretty sure this is just one guy trying the jewel box. So I finished off the Saber, and so then I went for the Astero. So I just tried to scram kite him as well, just in case he had any guns. It turned out that he didn't, but I still think that's probably the best way to fight one. And this Astero fortunately dropped his sister's launcher, which paid for my ship, which is just really good. So I really like the 4 faction frigates because I think they're all pretty nicely balanced against each other. And the strength of the hook bill is the versatility of the fits allowed by its 5 mid slots, which allow it to counter almost anything if it's fit properly. And I think that can make it a very, very strong dueling frigate. But otherwise, if it's not fit optimally for the matchup that it's in, it can feel pretty ordinary. And a lot of the time, it's really not any better than a Kestrel. And I think this is in contrast to the other 3 faction frigates, which I think are just flat out better than their T1 equivalents in 99% of situations. Since I'm a bit less interested in the low-sec frigate dueling these days, it's probably not something I'll fly that much more, but I still think it's a very good ship and it's worth flying if you live in low-sec. So, thanks for watching.